Gentile here, BJ Dictor, Political Bitcoin Hour. We just wanted to have a little candid talk about Unconfiscatable, the kind of year that was, a little bit of politics and Bitcoin and where things are going.
Yeah, it's. I mean, this is the last conference of the year, I think.
It is, yeah, technically I think it is.
Yeah,
Yes.
and it's pretty good. I was in El Salvador a couple weeks ago. That conference was quite good. I spoke at that one, despite being very, very sick. But the feel and vibe of these smaller conferences, it seems to be consistent. It's all positive. This was a really good one. So hats off to Tone. Hosted a fabulous conference. Even today, met lots of people who we know who we are online.
Right.
We've heard each other. And like, oh man, I've been trying to meet you sort of thing. So like that sort of vibe's great. I loved it.
It is. It's so nice. And we were saying on Simply Bitcoin earlier, you have to come to a conference. You got to meet people in real life. Whether it's part of the reason we do the Political Bitcoin Hour is because politics is local, right? And you have to know the people around you. You have to be building those coalitions, but also building in a survival situations. The number one thing in any survival situation is community. So building up the relationships is really why we come to these things. I mean, the speakers, ironically, you can hear on YouTube. You can see that we're quite honestly, but the relationships are something that you can't get anywhere else.
And the other thing is, as we discussed, and by the way, shout out to Simply Bitcoin. If you're watching this and you're not following them, give Nico and Simply Bitcoin and Opti a follow. But politics is also inevitable. And the quote that I brought up in our talk, it's from the philosopher Persides. That just because you don't take an interest in politics doesn't mean politics won't take an interest in you. And this is how many people get blindsided by ethnic cleansing, by genocide, by conflicts around the world. It's because they weren't watching. They figured, I don't care about politics. Well, okay, but sometimes there are some dangers that are looming. And I know I'm sensitive to many of the Bitcoiners who've given up on politics. I get it. We've discussed that many times, right? Yeah. But at the end of the day, somebody in the Bitcoin space has to at least engage in it. And they have to be kind of the political front for Bitcoin. And you and I mean, from the very first time we met each other, we really clicked on that.
It was on Spaces. It was on Spaces. And I think it was on Simply Bitcoin, ironically, actually. And we connected because of that. And
then we met up in Miami. And then, it's... So it's nice to find chemistry with people in Bitcoin. It's not terribly difficult, to be entirely honest.
True.
But on the political side, it tends to be a little bit more of a challenge. And for anybody who's watching this who's participated in the political Bitcoin spaces, thank you. And please join us in the future.
Yes. And I think we have some really cool plans going forward. And BJ, I know you've been working in the background on things to kind of grow and expand things over time. And I think you don't want to get too ahead of yourself. Obviously, we've been kind of prototyping it, if you will, the last 6, 7, 8 months. We've been doing it since Miami, and prototyping. Hey, what does this look like? What's the appetite for it? Quite honestly, right? We've had hundreds of people each time we do it. Hundreds of people coming on and doing it, and we could have done it, and no one showed up, and it's just you and I doing this by ourselves. But obviously, there was an appetite for it because everyone simply has got their thing. Cafe Bitcoin, everyone has kind of like their thing they're doing, and they don't always feel comfortable to necessarily go into Cafe Bitcoin, or you talk to Alex, and Alex has his structure and what he wants to kind of do, and there's a time and place for it. But what we do is again trying to bridge the gap from local politics and understanding like those great quotes. And you use that quote all the time, and I use the Plato quote of if you're not involved in politics, you're going to be governed by your inferiors. And so, and your quote makes me think of Art of War. I think it was Art of War, but it just you might not like war, but war likes you, and that's politics, as you well know. I mean, it is war, and you have to understand that going into it, or else you're going to get blindsided.
Yeah, and also wanted to do something for people because you've been in these spaces before. As soon as somebody opens up, the politics Pandora's box, then everything becomes political, and then in the case of Cafe Bitcoin, Alex has got to reel it in, and we saw this happening regularly, and just wanted to help out everybody else's platforms who don't want everything to be turned into politics. Let's build a space for, we'll absorb all the political conversations, and I think the reception's been pretty good, right?
It's been really good.
I love the ones that we're going to go on for an hour, four hours later. Right?
Damn it, BJ. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's appetite for it. And I think that's
Yeah.
what's important, and it's bridging that gap. We need more and more people. And we've talked about some of the people that are out there doing certain things like that, trying to bridge that gap. But there has to be more at the end of the day, because we said it on Simply earlier.
Yeah.
You want Bitcoin on every politician's lips, good, bad, indifferent, doesn't matter. That the Streisand effect, you want that on their mind all the time. People thinking about it, because like it or not, the average person still looks to elected leaders as leaders. That just is what it is, right? So,
or as Stephen Hicks and I discussed, the average person looks to the political class to defer their responsibility of decision making and defers it to them, right? And that's part of the reason we're in the predicament we're in right now.
Yes.
But I know we talked a little bit before about kind of what I've been working on for quite some time. And I don't talk about it much in the political Bitcoin space. I mentioned a little bit, but I do produce a number of podcasts, not on record, and true crime, and I do my own live stream that's turning into a podcast as well. I'd like to take Political Bitcoin Hour and incorporate that in this sort of broader project, and I think we've been testing it almost long enough. There's still little kinks we got to work out and some structure and systemization of stuff. But I think that's something we can do, much like my book, which I don't have a copy here, is not about Bitcoin, but Bitcoin plays a role in it, a very important role. I think in terms of the startup that myself and my partner have put together, I'd like Bitcoin to play a role in it. And I think the Political Bitcoin Hour fits nicely into that.
I do too. Really quick, I want to get your thought on something actually before we talk about the future a little bit. Well, it is kind of the future though. But there's a lot of Bitcoiners that, and I think this is why, us trying to take the heat off a little bit of some of the other spaces that might not want to get political. There's a lot of people that think politics won't exist. In a Bitcoin world or hyper Bitcoinized world, politics won't exist, and we're going to take down the government and we're going to topple it, things like that. What are your thoughts on whether one that happens or not, but maybe two, timeline on if that does happen? When might that happen? When all of a sudden you have this hyper Bitcoinized world and politics just doesn't exist. Now, we're humans. Politics is human, and human is politics. So what are your thoughts on a lot of the Bitcoiners that say, hey, I want to stay away from this. This stuff isn't going to exist. Government's just, corrupt and illegal in and of itself. What are your thoughts on that? And kind of, again, the macro of why we're doing this.
I don't know. There's two approaches. I'm always of two minds on many issues. The more traditional conservative view of the world, and then the more futuristic view of the world, right? And I think that's endemic of our generation. Growing around technology, and you kind of can look at both things. I think, unfortunately, politics is human nature because human beings are dishonest. It's just how we are, and sometimes, I'm a big free market person, but there are people that exploit the free market and will try. It's that 5% of people that Jordan Peterson talks about, Heim talks about, like many philosophical thinkers and psychologists know about that 5%. So those 5% of people are never going to go away. That's just the way it is. No matter how much power or influence over society that Bitcoin has, it's not going to change human nature, right? And how we behave politically, if you study ancient history and you go back through the various empires around the world, and it doesn't matter which continent you're on, you could be in ancient North America with native tribes, and go back to the Aztecs and stuff, or you could go all the way back to the Akkadians and the Sumerians in Mesopotamia. Once you have a certain number of people getting together, unfortunately, division of labor will take over. That's where you get centralized power, and unfortunately, you get corruption. Now, will Bitcoin mitigate that? Yes, I think it will greatly mitigate it to a point because it forces honesty because it's a public ledger. But will it remove centralization entirely and corruption and certain people who might have nefarious intent? No, because unfortunately that's just human behavior for a certain group of people. And that's fine. Mm-hmm. I mean, as long as we know that, we can navigate around that. So I don't think it's an either or. I think like most things in life is messy, it's murky, and it's somewhere in the middle.
Nolan Barley talks a lot. He said this about a year ago. He said Bitcoin would be the #1 issue in the 2024 presidential election. He said that I think before Robert F. Kennedy got into the race, even actually. And we saw it right away. Again, you mentioned this earlier. You walk into the Miami Bitcoin conference, and what do you hear? You hear Robert F. Kennedy saying, "I was orange pilled because of the Canadian trucker convoy and what you guys were doing in Canada, across the entire country and captivating the world." And so you're seeing that again, Bitcoin on politicians' lips, amazing because now the average person is now seeing it everywhere. But again, do you think that's something that's going to continue increasing into the election this year? And you're seeing Bitcoin itself being more of a prominent role, climbing up the ranks, I guess, of what people, you always look at the climate change. The government's always pushing climate change, but it's always, for the last 20 years, at the very bottom of what election or electors or voters care about. Always the bottom, like 1% care about it the most. It's always the economy, something else. Do you think Bitcoin just continues to rise up the ranks of like the important issue of fixing the money in essence? Hey, there's inflation, the money's broken, people realizing that. How do you kind of see the next year playing out?
I don't know. I think it depends on Trump. I think it depends if Trump takes a position on Bitcoin, and if he evolves his position on Bitcoin and goes more free market, which is where he should be, or if he continues down the pathway that now I happen to know from people, let's say, tangentially linked to Trump advisors. We'll leave it at that. It might be a little bit more, but whatever. Jared knows all about crypto and the crypto space. They know what Bitcoin is. He knows what Bitcoin is. But that's not Trump's style of management. Trump's style of management is he defers to his departments and his advisors. That's he's running his whole business, his entire life. Like people think, oh, he's a dummy. No, he knows how to pick the right people to build infrastructure to advise him. He's very good at that. That's his #1 skill. So it depends what those advisors, how they evolve. They're clearly watching what's happening with BlackRock in the Bitcoin space. There's a lot of chatter about it. I guess at this point they don't think they need to comment on it. Will that change? I don't know. But they say in politics, a week is like a decade in politics. Things, hour to hour, things can change. So you never know.
How do you think? And I know a few more minutes here and we'll wrap up. But what are your thoughts on we had Shane Hazel come in a month or two ago, come in and stir the bee's nest up, saying, hey, all wars are bankers' wars. It was right on the back, obviously, of the terrorist attack, Hamas on Israel on October 7th. And what was happening there, obviously Ukraine, all these things going on, got some people emotionally charged. This was in our political Bitcoin hour spaces. Got people going. But these are the talks we want to be having. And it was enlightening people to, wow, because this is the way I was watching.
Shane's a great
guy.
And
he meant no harm by it, right? He was just saying, hey, this is my experience and where I've seen this, and it's part of the reason I was orange pilled over the last really 10, 15 years, but I didn't come to Bitcoin until 5 years ago. But seeing that for what it is, and wow, the American military industrial complex, whatever it is, might not be the best thing to have in the world, this complex. And that's what Shane was explaining in essence. The central banks, these wars are bankers' wars. It goes back to World War I. Vickers paying or selling bullets to both sides of both factions, the Axis and Allies back then, and him kind of seeing that. That's what Bitcoiners see. Now, the average person, people that were triggered in that conversation, there were some other reasons, but a lot of it too is the first time you're hearing that or just coming to Bitcoin and seeing that. That's very hard to kind of wrap your mind around. What do you see with some of the wars, obviously the Ukraine and Israel, what's going on? What's your kind of macro take on, because people I think sometimes group them though, like, oh, Ukraine is the same thing as Israel, what's going on, all these different things with China, Taiwan. What is your take on just kind of the overall macro sentiment of the American military industrial complex and them just continually inserting themselves into different areas? What are your thoughts on all that? We only have a couple minutes, BJ.
Yeah, that is a long.
Take it where you want, but
I think it's a little bit of an oversimplification of the human experience. I remember watching, it was Eisenhower that brought up the military-industrial complex. That was a very different time, right? It's a very different world. I was watching this, a shout out to Lotus Eaters. On Brokenomics, who I'm good friends with those guys, Dan and Bo, who's their historian. He's an expert. He's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And they were reviewing the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Perkins, yeah.
And what I liked is they didn't just steel man the book; they also criticized it. And Bo, who is very open to the criticism of the military-industrial complex, we know it's all there. We get it. But he also said, but people are forgetting the context. Context is important both with language and history. That it was the Cold War. And now we can look back and just say, oh, the Cold War was just a thing. No, 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 no. The Cold War was massively significant in the world. And the type of anxiety that our parents' generation and grandparents' generation lived through, we don't understand, which is like, oh, it was over. Yes, but there were very real threats. And I think we, as human beings, we always look at the past with nostalgia. We tend to psychologically view the past more positively over time, and we forget the negative aspects of the past. So I think there's a lot more complexity in there. The other thing is, with all wars are bankers' wars. I think that's a symptom of it. That's not the cause. And unfortunately, there's something called human behavior and collectivism and tribalism. And that's the core of not all wars, obviously, but many of them. Some wars are because of politics. Some wars are because of political tribalism. Some wars are because of economics. And some wars are just a group of really corrupt people trying to milk it for as much as possible. I don't think any of those things are mutually exclusive, right? So sometimes you can have all those elements in one war. Some people will argue that that's when a war happens, when all of those things come in line. But to say it's just one thing, that's the oversimplification, like the conspiracy theories that we deal with. That it's all the Jews. Like, oh my God, Israel, 7 million people, 165 parties. You know why? Because nobody can agree on anything. No one agrees on anything. Oh, everybody criticizes, yet somehow it's a cabal running the world. Like, it's a cartoonish view of the world with any group. Anyone, whenever you say there's one X group that runs the world, that's a collectivist mindset that we need to get away from. We are individuals, right?
And you wrap that up perfectly, because it's what you began with, which is oversimplification. Humans want this answer, this very simple answer,
exactly.
And it's not. There's nuance and context.
And we've forgotten something that I've grown up with, and I know you've grown up with as well. Sometimes there are things that are just unknowable.
Yes.
We'll just never. I'll give an example. Perfect example. We had that car that crashed at the border on the Rainbow Bridge. And, the local news just went with it. Oh, it's a terrorist attack, and started, reciting some claims. Oh, there was a car blew up. It turned out that wasn't true. So what happened is a car, as we know, for those watching in the future, a car just careened out of control as a Bentley and hit a fence right next to one of the booths, and exploded. And the type of explosion that occurred was indicative of a car that didn't have explosions, because it was too small and isolated. And I remember people going back and forth, speculating and all that sort of stuff. And I started to think about it. Like, well, I had a friend who worked at Bentley, and when I was working at Lamborghini, and he. I remember him telling me what the demographic was like, and I started thinking about that. I mean, most Bentley owners are older. They're in their late 50s to early 70s. Many of them are overweight. Many of them work a lot, endure a lot of stress. What does that equal? That equals a potential cardiac arrest. Like, in terms of demographic, they're most potentially susceptible to heart failure, cardiac arrest, all that sort of stuff. Well, if somebody happens to have that one, they're on a highway, they happen to, die of a heart attack while they're driving, foot hits the gas, and the passenger is freaking out, doesn't know, put it into first gear, put it into park, stall the car, or whatever. Well, that's what would lead to it, sort of thing, right? So I think in that particular case, we're never going to know. We're never going to know what actually happened. And that's okay. That's okay. Sometimes things happen in the world and we don't know what they are, but we've forgotten that. We think everything has a simple explanation, and we all must know that explanation. And I remember a world where it's a little bit more complex than that.
This we're going to wrap this up here. Going into the future here?
Yeah.
What is your just for a political Bitcoin hour and what people can do? Obviously, they can you can join. These are the talks we generally have. There'll be BJ a lot, and I a lot of times. Will be maybe the first 5 minutes, or it could be the first 20 minutes, or whatever. We're kind of going back and forth a lot. People are coming in and joining, and then the plebs kind of start taking over and then talking about the political topics as they are related to Bitcoin. But what do you see going forward when it comes to a political Bitcoin hour, and how people can join or get involved, but kind of further the cause, but also where things are going for a political Bitcoin hour into the future? It could be the next year or the next 5 years.
Well, I think what we have to continue doing our spaces. Join Wednesdays at 1 o'clock, usually, unless there's Eastern Standard Time, usually, unless there's something going on. I think this year what we'll do is we'll do the transition of taking the space and also make it a podcast at the same time. And I have a Substack that most of my Substack audience are political. And I have a number of things in queue. By the way, bjdictor.substack.com. And your Substack is?
It's brandgentili.substack.com.
So I think what we'll do is we'll work together on having a launch of the podcast form of Political Bitcoin Hour, encourage people to join. And by the way, it's for everybody. It doesn't matter your left, right, up, down, libertarian, communist, whatever.
Love to have more women involved too.
And yes, that is key. And this is a good way to I hope, a venue to bring more women into the space, right? But I think that's what we'll work on this year.
Absolutely.
And incorporating it into a broader platform, and hopefully take the heat off all the other Bitcoin podcasts and spaces. That when somebody starts talking about politics and everybody goes, "Oh God, no, please no," just we'll vacuum them all up and come join us.
Exactly.
And it's fun. Like, I don't know, you and I have a very positive perspective on life, despite all the noise going on. And I think if we maintain that, then it's going to be a welcome space for everybody.
We do a good job, and gets on. So the other big thing, really a big push going forward, whether it's on the interview circuits or political Bitcoin hours, getting women into the spaces.
I have no problem with more women in my life. I don't know about you.
Wasn't the answer I was expecting, but I like it.
Yeah.
So, transitioning from that a little bit, speaking of women, 50% of the world women, God do something.
Yeah.
The regions of the world, what are we looking like for political Bitcoin now? When it comes to politics and Bitcoin, how these are intersecting, we've talked about, obviously El Salvador is huge in news, now Argentina, you have some African countries, they're being bantied about. But what are you seeing from that perspective on maybe how political Bitcoin hour can really start moving into the Hispanic regions and going into those areas, and then obviously over into Africa? And what are you seeing just regionally throughout the world, and how that things can be shaped up?
Well, I mean, we can talk more about it, but especially Latin America. Pero tú necesitas hablar español y aprender.
No, I can't speak. No habla español.
Shout out to Davo, supporter of mine from Canada, Colombian. He's been in there many times.
He's great.
And he's really on top of Latin America for obvious reasons. But I do think we're going to be speaking more about it, and I would like us to speak more about politics in Latin America in the scope of Bitcoin, because you don't just have now El Salvador, which is good. There's some good things and some bad things about it. But now you have Milei, and not because Milei is a Bitcoiner. He knows what it is, but he's a free market libertarian.
Yes. That's a misconception I think people have, that you just touched
That's
on.
right.
Yeah.
So it's somewhere in the middle.
Yes.
But the point is, as a free market libertarian, I think that lays the pathway for greater acceptance of Bitcoin in the society. And Latin America's been going one direction for many, many years. As the producer who's holding the camera right now would love us to get into more details, but we don't have nearly enough time as to why, but we will talk about that more. But I think it's going to be a key zone into the next several generations as we see those political shifts. We see the changing demographics in the West, which is antithetical to the desires of the people who live in those countries, especially those who've immigrated to those countries, right? Mass immigration hurts new immigrants more than it hurts the people who are from those nations, because it saturates the job market for new immigrants who came to new markets for opportunities, right? So I think we're going to see a lot of revised framing around Latin America because of the stupidity we're seeing in the West. And Latin America may pave the way forward, much like the Emirates. Abu Dhabi and Dubai are paving the way in the Middle East, and someone would even say there's elements of that now in Saudi Arabia. Yeah. The Abraham Accords, which will eventually be the negotiations will commence again. There's even talk about that already. Wow. So I think you're going to see a shift in this multipolar world, and Latin America I think it's going to be a massive, potentially could be a massive opportunity for Bitcoiners. All right, so aside from that little hiccup that we're going to edit out, listen, low budget production, that's why we need to start raising money in sats, right? We need to start to reach out and crowdfund for people to help us grow this. But anyways, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity to look at Latin America for Bitcoiners as an opportunity to learn about messaging, watch the changing landscape of politics in Latin America, because that potentially could be the solution for some of the bifurcation that we're seeing in the West that all of us, wherever we are on the political spectrum, are opposed to.
In last thing, kind of touching on this women issue and the different regions of the world, it's an opportunity. We talk about this all the time in Political Bitcoin Hour. You can vote with, traditionally it was the ballot box and the ammo box. Now people can move. You can vote with their feet, we can vote with our money, and vote with our voice. We have the media. There's so many different ways to vote now, and the women issue kind of ties into that, where women around the world, I'm sure they're handling a lot of remittances a lot of times, or people sending money back and forth and things of that nature. So now they have the ability through Bitcoin, through sending sats and the Lightning Network, they have the ability to now vote in essence with their wallet.
And you know what's interesting too, and this is for all the women who are on Instagram, who have platforms and whatever, do you notice how women who come into Bitcoin are treated? They're treated like goddesses.
Yes.
Because there's so few of them.
Yes.
There's such an appetite for more women in Bitcoin who can speak intellectually on the topic, yes. That they roll out the red carpet for any woman who gets involved and wants to advocate for women, because there's such a shortage of women who are engaged on this topic, right? From a philosophical and cultural perspective. So I think there's an opportunity there. So if you want to be famous and you're an Instagram model, come hang out at a Bitcoin conference. I'm telling you, there is so much opportunity for you.
Boy, oh boy. It aligns all incentives. That's the beautiful part. It truly aligns all incentives. So yeah. Thank you from BJ and I both. I mean, like we said, he mentioned, we're going to be looking to raise money, bring more people on board, whether it's from a top level down, but also from the bottom up, people joining the space and really contributing to this bridge, as we talk about all the time, bridging this gap between politics and Bitcoin, because like it or not, we still live in a fiat world. We still live in a very political world, and maybe that does change years from now, and there's less politics or whatever you want to say, or less government, or no government, whatever. But for right now, and for the foreseeable future, there's going to be a lot of politics in our future.
Oh, that's not going away anytime soon, unfortunately.
Exactly. Thank you for joining us here, Political Bitcoin Hour. BJ Dichter, Brand Gentile. Join us every week. Right now, Wednesdays, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also, follow BJ at his website. You can go find him there at bjdichter.com.
And also, make sure to subscribe to Brandon. Join our Twitter Spaces. Ask to come on stage. Everybody's welcome. It doesn't matter what your opinions are. There's no such thing as a dumb question. We want as many of you engaged as possible. And thank you for all your support this year.